Hello guys, welcome to DrNightStare. I know you guys come here to relax and take a nap. So before we go, please hit like and subscribe. By the way, also tell me what time and where you guys listening from. Alright then. The cake sat on the kitchen table, candles burning bright. 8 small flames danced. My family sang the birthday song. My father smiled. My mother held a camera. My brother giggled beside me. I blew out the candles. Sweet smoke curled into the air. A sound ripped through the window glass. The world fractured into sharp pieces. Something struck my chest. It felt like a punch. My breath left my body in a sudden rush. I fell from my chair. The floor was cold. My eyes found my mother. Her face was still. Blood bloomed on her shirt. My father lay beside her. My brother crumpled near the table. The air tasted metallic. My vision blurred around the edges. A heavy weight settled over me. My eyelids grew impossibly heavy. The last thing I heard was a quiet gurgle, then nothing at all. The world turned black. A sudden gasp pulled air into my lungs. It scraped against my throat. My eyes opened. A bright light shone directly above me. My body lay flat on something hard and cold. My head throbbed behind my eyes. I moved my fingers. They felt stiff. I could feel a rough sheet covering me. My skin was cold. A strange smell, clinical and sharp, filled my nostrils. I pushed at the sheet. It felt heavy. My chest rose with each breath. A man's voice called out. It sounded startled. Footsteps pounded down a hallway. A woman appeared in my line of sight. Her eyes were wide. She wore blue scrubs. Her mouth opened, but no words came out. Another man joined her. He had a clipboard in his hand. He looked at me, then at the woman. He looked at the sheet. His face went pale. "She's breathing," the woman whispered. Her voice shook. The man with the clipboard dropped it. It clattered on the tiled floor. He reached for my wrist. His fingers were cold. He pressed 2 fingers against the pulse point. His eyes widened further. He looked at me, then back at the woman. "Pulse?" he stated. His voice was a choked sound, a strong pulse. The room began to fill with more people. Everyone wore scrubs. They spoke in rapid, hushed tones. They pointed at me. They checked their instruments. They checked them again. One woman ran a hand over my forehead. Her touch felt tentative. My skin was still cold. I tried to sit up. A wave of dizziness swept over me. I lay back down. My throat felt dry. I wanted water. They moved me. I was on a soft gurney. The wheels made a soft rolling sound. Bright lights passed above. They led me into a different room. This room had more machines. Wires attached to my chest. A cuff squeezed my arm. They talked about readings. They talked about vitals. They talked about a miracle. I heard the word impossibles many times. Days bled into each other. I stayed in that room. Doctors and nurses came and went. They took blood samples. They looked into my eyes with small lights. They pressed on my stomach. They listened to my heart with stethoscopes. My heart beat strong. My body felt fine. There were no wounds. The doctors shook their heads. They looked confused. They had no answers. My family was gone. No one spoke about it. I did not ask. It felt like a bad dream. One afternoon, a different person entered my room. He did not wear scrubs. He wore a dark sweater. It was Jude, my cousin Jude. His dark hair fell across his forehead. His eyes were dark too. He walked to my bedside. He looked at me. His expression was not surprised. He did not call for nurses. He just looked at me. "Charlie," he said. His voice was quiet. It held a knowing quality. I tried to smile. My lips felt stiff. "Jude." He sat in the chair beside my bed. He did not touch me. He just watched me. His gaze felt heavy. It felt like he saw something no one else did. The doctors talked about my return. They called it a medical anomaly. They used long words. Jude simply looked at me. His eyes held no confusion. They held a different emotion. It was not sadness. It was not happiness. It was understanding. "You're back," he stated. It was not a question. It was a simple fact. I nodded. "I think so." My voice felt raspy. He leaned forward. His voice dropped lower. "They don't understand it. They never will." I frowned. "Understand what?" He met my eyes again. His gaze seemed to reach deep inside me. "That you're not really back. Not the way they think." A coldness settled in my stomach. It was not the cold from the morgue. It was a deeper, spreading cold. It felt wrong. His words suggested something about me had changed, something fundamental. I was still me. I felt like me. But Jude's eyes told a different story. They saw a difference. He saw a shadow where there should be light. He saw a tear in the fabric of what was real. A nurse entered the room then. She smiled brightly at Jude. She asked if everything was all right. Jude nodded slowly. He stood up. He looked at me one last time. His lips pressed into a thin line. He turned and walked out of the room. The cold feeling stayed with me. It clung to my skin. It seeped into my bones. The medical staff treated me like a miracle. Jude treated me like a secret. His eyes held a truth I could not yet name. It was a dark, unsettling truth. It made the air around me feel thick. I was alive. I was whole. Yet I felt like a stranger in my own skin. My own heartbeat seemed to echo differently now. It carried a strange, hollow sound. I was no longer just Charlie. I was something else. I was the impossible. I was no longer just Charlie. I was something else. I was the impossible. Life resumed a strange rhythm after the hospital. Aunt May and Uncle Arthur took me in, their house a quiet place filled with unspoken rules. Jude visited often. He just watched me with those dark, understanding eyes. I started school again. My classmates looked at me with curious glances. They knew I had died. They knew I was back. No one said a word about it. I felt like a fragile ghost walking among the living. The first incident happened during my 9th year. I climbed a tall oak tree in Aunt May's yard. I loved the strong branches and the view from the top. A loose branch gave way under my foot. I gasped for air. My hands slipped. I fell toward the hard ground. Time stretched. A strong jerk caught my shirt. My fall stopped. I hung upside down, tangled in a lower branch. My shirt fabric was ripped. I felt a sudden cold rush. I looked around the tree. No one stood there. Uncle Arthur found me moments later. He scolded me for being careless. He told me I was lucky. I just nodded. My heart still pounded against my ribs. I knew it was not luck. A few months later, I walked home from school. I crossed the street at the corner. A delivery truck sped around the bend. It came directly at me. I froze in the road. The truck horn blared loud. I could not move my feet. A sudden push shoved me hard onto the sidewalk. My knees scraped. The truck rushed past, wind buffeting my hair. I looked up. No one stood beside me. The street was empty. My breath hitched in my throat. My scraped knees burned. I just ran the rest of the way home. Aunt May bandaged my wounds. She lectured me about watching for cars. She thought I had tripped. I did not correct her. These strange near misses continued through my childhood. A brick fell from a chimney while I played below. A heavy shelf collapsed near my head in the library. A rusty nail appeared in my shoe on a hike. Each time I escaped without serious injury. Each time, something intangible seemed to intervene, or a chilling void of absence followed the event. Aunt May and Uncle Arthur blamed my clumsiness. They attributed the incidents to childish imagination. They said I needed to be more careful. They said I was still recovering from a difficult experience. They took me to a kind woman who talked about coping with trauma. The woman asked about my feelings. She talked about bad dreams. She asked about ghosts. I shook my head. Ghosts seemed too simple. Then I started seeing him. I was 10 years old. I played alone in the park. He stood across the field near the tall sycamores. He was a boy with dark hair and pale skin. He looked about my age. He just watched me. His eyes were wide. They held no warmth. They conversed a thall of wide. I looked back. He was gone. The grass where he stood remained undisturbed. The next time, I was 12. I swam in the community pool. I held my breath under the water. I opened my eyes. He floated beside me. His dark hair waved around his face. His eyes stared straight into mine. They were not human eyes. They were black, empty voids. Terror seized me. I thrashed upwards, breaking the surface, gasping. I coughed water from my lungs. My heart hammered. I looked around the pool. No one else was near me. The other swimmers were far away. The boy was gone. I got out of the pool. My body shivered. I never went back to that pool. The incidents escalated. They became deliberate. I was 13. I walked home from a friend's house. It was twilight. The streets were quiet. A cold hand clamped over my mouth. A strong arm wrapped around my waist. I screamed, but the sound was muffled. I fought hard. I kicked. I bit the hand. The hand did not flinch. It smelled like damp earth. The boy dragged me towards the darker alleyway. I saw his face in the fading light. It was the boy from the park, the boy from the pool. His eyes were still black. His lips pulled back in a silent snarl. He had thin, dark hair. He was real. He was there. I struggled with all my might. My elbow slammed into his ribs. He grunted. His grip faltered for a second. I twisted free. I ran. I did not look back. I just ran. I ran all the way home. I burst through the front door. Aunt May looked up from her book. "What is it, Charlie?" she asked. Her voice was calm. "A boy," I gasped. "He tried to take me." My voice shook. Aunt May put her book down. She came to me. She ran her hand over my hair. "A boy, darling. Where?" "Outside," I said. "In the alley." He was pulling me. Uncle Arthur came from the kitchen. He listened. He went outside. He looked around. He came back inside. "No one is there, Charlie. The alley is empty." "But he was real," I insisted. "He had dark hair. He was pale." Aunt May sighed softly. "Charlie, it's getting dark. You must be spooked. You have a vivid imagination sometimes." Uncle Arthur nodded. "It's a lot of old houses around here. The shadows play tricks." They hugged me. They tried to comfort me. They believed I was scared. They did not believe a boy had attacked me. They thought it was a dream. They thought it was my trauma. I felt a deep, sickening loneliness spread through me. They could not see him. They could not understand. The boy began to appear more often. His presence felt like a cold whisper behind me. I heard his name once. I was 14. I sat on a bench outside the school. Two older girls walked past. One spoke in a hushed voice. "Did you hear about Ren Oliver?" she asked. The other girl shivered. They never found his body. Just his clothes near the old well. He just vanished. They spoke of him like a local ghost story. The name Ren Oliver settled into my mind like a heavy stone. It felt wrong. It felt like a key. I knew the boy pursuing me was Ren Oliver. He was supposedly dead. He escalated his attempts. One afternoon, I walked by the river. Ren emerged from the trees. He walked slowly toward me. His eyes were like black holes. He did not speak. He held a large rock in his hand. My breath caught in my throat. I backed away. He moved faster. I turned to run. He tackled me from behind. We tumbled down the bank toward the swirling river. The rock slipped from his grasp. He pinned me against the muddy bank. His face was inches from mine. His breath was cold, like grave dirt. His fingers closed around my neck. They were icy. They squeezed. I clawed at his hands. I kicked. My vision blurred around the edges. This was not a dream. This was real. He wanted to kill me. A sudden flash of light caught his attention. He looked up. His grip loosened for a split second. I seized my chance. I pushed him with all my strength. I scrambled up the bank. I ran without looking back. My throat was raw. My body ached. I knew someone had driven by. I knew someone had saved me. I never saw the car. Ren was gone when I looked again. I arrived home frantic. My clothes were covered in mud. My throat felt bruised. I cried as I told Aunt May and Uncle Arthur. I told them his name. I told them Ren Oliver had tried to drown. I explained everything. Aunt May held me tight. Uncle Arthur called the police. 2 officers arrived. They listened patiently. They searched the riverbank. They found nothing. No footprints. No sign of a struggle. They returned empty-handed. They spoke to Aunt May and Uncle Arthur in low tones. I heard the word delusions. I heard the word delusions. I heard trauma. My family looked at me with pity. They looked at me with concern. They did not look at me with belief. They arranged for more therapy sessions. They thought I needed help coping with my past. They thought I needed help separating reality from my mind. They said I was seeing things. They said I was imagining danger. I was not imagining. He was real. He was death. He was coming for me. I became isolated. My friends saw me as strange. My family saw me as broken. Jude was the only one. He would watch me with those dark eyes. He never said I was wrong. He never said I was imagining things. He just watched me. His silent understanding was a heavy comfort. It was a terrifying confirmation. He saw what I saw. He knew what I knew. I stopped talking about Ren. I stopped telling them about the near-fatal incidents. I just learned to live with the fear. I learned to run faster. I learned to watch the shadows. Ren Oliver was not a dream. He was not a symptom of trauma. He was the impossible. He was the boy who should be dead. He was the one who sought to make me dead again. He was death itself, relentless in his pursuit. Every creak in the house, every rustle in the trees, every sudden chill became a sign. He was always there. He was always watching. He was always coming for me. My 18th birthday arrived cold and quiet. Aunt May had baked a cake, but the festive air felt thin, strained. Jude sat across from me at the kitchen table, his dark eyes fixed on my face. He had been insistent for days, his warnings growing sharper with each passing hour. "You cannot go out tonight, Charlie," he said, his voice low and urgent. "Please, just stay inside. Stay with us." I shook my head, a familiar frustration building. "I am 18, Jude. I am going out with Liz. It is my birthday." I believed I had outrun the shadow for long enough. Ren had not shown himself in months. Perhaps he was truly gone. My family's dismissals had slowly worn down my vigilance, convincing me I was safe, if only for a night. Aunt May entered the room then, carrying a stack of plates. She gave Jude a disapproving look. "Leave her be, Jude," Aunt May said gently. "She is a young woman. She needs to live her life." Jude stood up abruptly. He glared at Aunt May, his jaw tight. "You know nothing of this, May. You are blind to it." He turned and walked out, the anger in his stride shaking the floor. Aunt May just sighed, shaking the floor. Aunt May just sighed. A tired sound. I ignored Jude's desperate plea. I chose to believe my family's manufactured calm. Later that evening, the music pulsed at Liz's party. Laughter echoed through the house. For a brief time, I felt normal, free. Liz pulled me onto the makeshift dance floor, her bright smile contagious. We danced, forgetting everything but the rhythm. The night air was cool, smelling of damp earth and distant rain. I stepped out onto the porch for a moment, needing a breath of fresh air. The party noise muffled behind the closed door. A shadow detached itself from the ancient oak tree in Liz's yard. It moved with an unnatural speed. My blood froze. This was not the Wren I knew. His form was impossibly tall. His skin stretched taut and gray over sharp bones. Enormous, leathery wings, like a bat's, unfolded from his back, scraping against the bark of the tree. His eyes, now entirely black, burned with a cold, ancient malice. His mouth, a ragged tear in his face, curved into a silent, cruel smile. He was a monstrous parody of the boy I remembered. He was a living nightmare. I stumbled back, gasping. He was no longer just a boy. He was a creature of the dark, born of the forest's hidden places. His presence radiated pure, unbridled hunger. He took one step, then another, his gait jerky and inhuman. My mind screamed at me to run, but my feet were rooted to the spot. Liz opened the door then, stepping out onto the porch. "Charlie, are you okay?" she asked, her voice laced with concern. She saw Wren. Her eyes widened. Her smile vanished. A scream tore from her throat. Wren moved with a speed no human could match. He lunged past me. His taloned hand closed around Liz's throat. Her scream ended abruptly, a strangled sound. He lifted her effortlessly from the ground. Her feet dangled, kicking uselessly in the air. Her face turned blue. He squeezed. I watched, helpless, paralyzed by a terror deeper than any I had known. Liz's body went limp. Wren dropped her to the ground. She lay still, her eyes staring blankly at the sky. My paralysis broke. Rage surged through me, hot and fierce. I saw the glint of my father's old hunting knife, a birthday gift from Uncle Arthur, tucked into my boot. I pulled it out. Wren turned his head slowly, his black eyes fixing on me. He took a step forward, his grotesque wings twitching. I lunged at him, knife raised. I plunged the blade deep into his chest. It sank in with sickening ease. He made a guttural sound, a strangled shriek that was not human. His wings thrashed. He stumbled back, clutching at the wound. Black ichor, thick and viscous, poured from the gash. He fell to his knees. His body spasmed violently. He collapsed onto the ground beside Liz, his monstrous form convulsing. He stopped moving. A strange metallic smell filled the air. People rushed out from the party, drawn by Liz's scream. Someone shrieked at the sight of Wren, another at Liz's still form. Aunt May was among them. She saw me, the knife in my hand. Her face went ashen. Jude pushed through the crowd, his eyes wide with a terrible knowing. "He is dead," I whispered, my voice raw. "I killed him." I stared at Wren's body, the wound gaping in his chest. Then the wound began to close. Slowly, impossibly, the torn flesh knitted itself back together. The black ichor receded. The color returned to his skin, the gray fading to a sickly pallor. His chest rose with a slow, deliberate breath. His black eyes snapped open. He sat up, completely healed, completely whole. He looked at me, a flicker of ancient amusement in his eyes. Aunt May grabbed my arm, her grip like iron. "We must go, Charlie. Now." Her voice was urgent, desperate. Jude was already pushing through the shocked onlookers. They pulled me away, away from Wren, away from Liz. We ran, away from the party, away from the scene of impossible death and impossible revival. They drove me to Aunt May's house. The living room was lit by a single lamp, casting long, dancing shadows. Aunt May paced the floor, wringing her hands. Jude stood by the window, his back to us, his shoulders tense. The terrible understanding in his eyes was clearer now. "Charlie," Aunt May began, her voice trembling, "there is something you need to know, something we have kept from you." She sat heavily on the sofa, her face etched with a century of pain. "Your life, after that night, it was not a miracle. It was a bargain." My head reeled. "A bargain? What are you talking about?" Jude turned from the window. His eyes met mine, filled with a deep, crushing sorrow. "A fey bargain, Charlie. One our family made long ago out of desperation. Over 100 years ago, a sickness swept through our line. Our ancestors went to the forest, to the old king, a powerful fey lord. They begged for a cure, for their children to live." Aunt May picked up the story, her voice low. "The old king demanded a price. He offered to save our line, to ensure our children would always return from the brink of death. He offered you, Charlie, a continued existence. But in exchange," she paused, her breath catching, "in exchange he demanded 2 human sacrifices. 2 children, to be chosen from outside our family, to be given to him. They would be taken into his realm, converted into his heirs, to serve him forever. They would be tortured, remade, stripped of their humanity, becoming something else, something dark and eternal." My blood ran cold. "Sacrifices? What are you saying?" Jude stepped closer. "Ren Oliver was one of them, Charlie. He was taken when he was a boy. He was given to the Fey King to secure your life. The other was a girl, much younger, Emily Thorne. She vanished from the next village a year after Ren. They were gifts. For you." "No," I whispered, shaking my head. The horror of it clawed at my throat. "No, that cannot be true." Aunt May's eyes were full of tears. "It is true, Charlie. Every time you have faced death, every time you have escaped, it is because of them. Because Ren and Emily are suffering in the Fey realm, being twisted into what you saw tonight. Their endless torment fuels your continued life. You are a passive beneficiary, Charlie. You live because they die, over and over again, in ways you cannot imagine. You live because they become monsters." The truth slammed into me, a crushing, suffocating weight. My survival, my impossible return was not a miracle. It was a monstrous transaction. My life was built on a foundation of unimaginable suffering, on the stolen humanity of Ren Oliver and Emily Thorne. Ren was not death pursuing me. Ren was a victim, a sacrifice, twisted and returned by an ancient, cruel bargain, a consequence of my family's dark compact. He was trying to take back what was stolen from him. He was trying to end the endless agony I had condemned him to. He was trying to kill me, not out of malice, but out of a tortured desire for his own true death. I was alive, but the cost was an eternity of pain for others. The impossible truth shattered my world. My life was a lie, a cruel, grotesque bargain with a monstrous king. My life was a sequence of predictable days. I woke, drank cheap coffee, and stared at spreadsheets until my eyes burned. The apartment offered little comfort, its peeling paint a constant reminder of my stagnant existence. Bills arrived relentlessly, piling on the scarred kitchen table. Each envelope presented a small, insistent demand for money I barely possessed. I dreamed of escape, of a sudden windfall, but reality always anchored me to the chipped mug and the blinking cursor. One Tuesday, my routine broke. 3 figures stood outside my building when I returned from work. They wore dark robes, and hoods concealed their faces in shadow. They seemed to appear from nowhere, their presence stark against the gray concrete. I tried to walk past, my pace quickening, but one of them stepped forward. A voice, calm and without inflection, addressed me directly. "We offer damnation," it said. I stopped. Laughter caught in my throat. This was some elaborate prank. A street theater performance. "Damnation for what?" I asked, a cynical smirk on my face. The figure extended a hand. A dark, polished wood briefcase rested in its palm. The figure placed the case on the ground and opened it. Inside, neat stacks of currency filled the case. Crisp $100 bills displayed a vibrant green. More money lay there than I had ever seen. More than I could earn in a lifetime of spreadsheets and cheap coffee. It was too much. An absurd amount. My breath caught. "For the act of damnation," the voice repeated. The words resonated with a strange clarity. "We offer this sum, a full payment." My mind reeled. The sheer volume of cash was mesmerizing. My skepticism gave way to an immediate, primal hunger. The bills felt real, smelled real, looked undeniably authentic. My mundane existence flashed before my eyes. The mounting This money could change everything. It offered freedom directly. What does damnations entail?" I managed to ask, my voice hoarse. My eyes remained fixed on the green stacks. The figure closed the briefcase with a soft click. "It is a transaction, your spirit for this wealth. The consequences are your own to bear." Another figure produced a thick envelope from within its robes. It was heavy, sealed with black wax. An invitation. "Tonight. The address is inside." They turned and walked away. Their movements were silent, and their forms vanished into the twilight. I stood frozen, staring at the empty space where they had been. My heart pounded against my ribs. A cold sensation passed through me, but the image of the money remained vivid in my mind, overriding every logical warning. I clutched the envelope. The paper felt thick and expensive. My hands trembled as I tore it open. Inside, a single card bore an address to an old, forgotten church on the edge of the city. A time was etched below it, midnight. A knot of unease tightened in my stomach. The proposition was insane. Utterly preposterous. Yet, the image of that briefcase, overflowing with cash, fixed itself in my thoughts. The thought of financial freedom, of never worrying about bills again, was a powerful force. It pulled me completely, and my caution disappeared. I saw a life free of obligation, a future of limitless possibilities. The damnation seemed a distant, abstract concept when confronted with such tangible, immediate power. I told myself it was probably some elaborate game, a wealthy eccentric's twisted amusement, a small risk for an unimaginable reward. I would go, I would see, the money would be mine. I arrived at the church as the city lights began to dim completely. The structure stood apart from the other buildings on the street, its stone facade dark and worn. Weeds grew thick around the warped wooden doors. I walked past the front entrance, observing the empty street in the shadowed alleyways. No other cars were visible. No figures stood waiting outside. A heavy iron gate on the side of the building presented a small, unlocked pedestrian door. I pushed it open. A narrow path led to a smaller, unmarked door at the back of the church. This door was ajar, a sliver of deeper darkness visible within. I hesitated for a moment, the cold night air brushing my face. The image of the stacked money pulsed in my mind. I stepped through the opening. The air inside was stale and cool. A lone robed figure stood in the entryway, its face lost in shadow beneath a deep hood. This figure gestured with one hand, a silent command to follow. I walked down a short stone corridor. The walls felt rough under my fingertips. There were no windows, no torches, and only the faintest glow seemed to emanate from somewhere ahead. The figure moved silently before me, its footsteps making no sound on the stone floor. We entered a wide chamber. It was square and completely enclosed, with no openings for light or air. The walls were rough, unadorned stone. A single flickering oil lamp sat on a low stone pedestal in the center of the room, casting dancing shadows. The light revealed the contents of the room. Another robed figure stood near the pedestal. This one was taller, its posture rigid. Its face was also concealed by a hood. This figure was the cryptic cultist. It made no movement as I entered, its presence radiating a strange, still energy. In the center of the chamber sat an ominous stone chair. It was carved from a single block of dark, unpolished rock. Its back was high and straight, its seat flat. The arms were wide, resembling solid ledges. It looked cold and unyielding. The chair was not comfortable or inviting. It was a place of stark purpose. Behind the stone chair, against the far wall, stood a mysterious freestanding door. This door was black, without hinges or a frame. It simply stood upright, an unmoving rectangle of deeper darkness against the gray stone. No handle was visible. It seemed to float slightly above the floor. Its surface was smooth and absorbed the lamplight without reflection. It did not appear to lead anywhere. The taller cultist lifted a hand and pointed towards the stone chair. Its gesture was slow and deliberate. No words were spoken. I walked towards the chair, its cold surface visible even from a distance. The air grew colder as I approached it. I reached the chair and placed my hands on its arms. The stone felt rough and icy. I sat down. The surface pressed hard against my back and legs. The cultist approached. It stood directly before me. The lamplight did not penetrate the depths of its hood. I could not discern any features. The figure raised its hands. Its palms were open and empty. A whisper began. It was not a voice, but a multitude of sounds, like dry leaves scuttling across stone or sand being poured slowly. The sounds came from everywhere and nowhere, a delicate, pervasive rustling that settled around me. Then darkness descended. The oil lamp did not extinguish. Instead, a thick black shroud was placed over my head. It smelled of earth and something metallic. My vision vanished entirely. The immediate world became a wall of impenetrable black. The rustling whispers intensified, surrounding me completely. They were not words, but patterns of soft, insistent friction. A sensation touched my face, something fine and gritty. It was ash. The cultist was applying ash to my skin, over my eyes, and across my lips. The particles felt cold and dry, clinging to my skin. The whispers seemed to swirl around this touch, weaving themselves into the sensation of the ash. My ears filled with the sound, a constant shifting murmur. My other senses were completely shut down. The chair was still hard beneath me. The shroud pressed against my ears, muffling any outside sound. But the whispers were inside, a phenomenon within the darkness itself. The ritual continued. Time lost meaning. The whispers were a constant presence, sometimes near, sometimes distant. They did not form sentences. They did not convey messages. They were just sounds, abstract and unsettling, implying meaning without ever delivering it. The ash felt permanent on my skin, a dry layer that seemed to seep into me. The darkness was absolute. I felt completely isolated within the chamber, yet also immersed in the strange, whispering current. The nature of the damnation remained a mystery, a bizarre sensory experience. I was simply there, enduring the ash and the murmurs, suspended in an unknown process. Then, a sudden heavy pressure on my head. The shroud was lifted. The room returned, the oil lamp still flickering. The cultist stood back, its hands again empty. The other robed figure was gone. The stone chair was cold. The black door remained against the far wall, still and featureless. The ash clung to my skin and clothes. The whispers lingered at the edge of my hearing, a residue of sound. I sat there, the weight of the experience pressing down, the exact nature of the damnation still unknown but irrevocably marked on me. The money changed everything in an instant. I quit my job the next day and bought a new apartment overlooking the city. Expensive clothes replaced my old, worn garments. I dined in exclusive restaurants and traveled to distant, sun-drenched beaches. For weeks I lived a life of unrestrained luxury, the memories of the unsettling ceremony fading into a distant, bizarre dream. The ash had washed away, and the whispers, if they ever truly existed, were gone. I felt free and powerful, the master of my own destiny, finally unburdened by debt or obligation. The first shift happened subtly, a barely perceptible flicker at the edge of my vision. I was walking through a bustling market, enjoying the vibrant chaos of the crowd. A woman with a basket of fruit passed close by. For a fraction of a second, her face stretched, elongating into a maw of needle-sharp teeth. Her eyes became black, empty voids. The illusion vanished as quickly as it appeared, leaving her perfectly normal, smiling at a child. I blinked, dismissing it as fatigue, a trick of the light. Then the episodes grew more frequent and more vivid. Reflections in shop windows sometimes twisted, showing not my own image but a gaunt, distorted face with elongated limbs. Shadows danced with an unnatural life, coalescing into hunched figures that watched me from street corners. The figures never stayed fixed. They would writhe and dissolve back into ordinary darkness when I focused directly on them, leaving me with a racing heart and a chilling uncertainty. I started avoiding mirrors. I started staying indoors. My old apartment building seemed to disappear from the city map. I drove past the location where it should have stood. A gleaming, modern office block occupied the space instead, concrete and glass reaching for the sky. The old church was also gone. I returned to the address on the invitation repeatedly. The corner lot was empty, a neglected patch of overgrown grass and broken pavement where the ancient stones once stood. The disappearance was total, leaving no trace. There was no explanation. My calls to various city departments yielded nothing but confusion. It felt as if they had never existed at all, leaving me isolated with my increasingly fractured memories. Sleep brought no relief. Nightmares consumed my nights with terrifying clarity. I walked through endless, ash-choked corridors, the rustling whispers from the ceremony pressing against my mind. Monstrous shapes moved just beyond the reach of my sight. I tried to scream, but my throat was always constricted, filled with something gritty and dry. I woke each morning gasping for air, the taste of ash on my tongue, the whispers echoing in my inner ear. The line between dream and waking reality blurred. The world felt thin, stretched. The physical changes began slowly. I first noticed a strange stiffness in my fingers. They felt less pliable, harder. I dismissed it as arthritis, a psychosomatic symptom of stress. Then my skin began to feel different. It grew rougher, losing its softness. Small, raised patterns developed on the backs of my hands, like scales forming under the surface. I scratched at them incessantly, but they did not disappear. They spread. My reflection in the occasional glance showed a pallor, an unnerving gray tint to my complexion. My eyes seemed to sink deeper into their sockets, taking on an unnatural glint in certain lights. One morning, after a particularly vivid nightmare of being encased in stone, I examined myself thoroughly in the bathroom mirror. The person staring back was not entirely me. My skin was dry and cracked, crisscrossed with lines that looked like fissures. My fingers were thicker, their nails elongated and curved, resembling claws. My hair was brittle, falling out in clumps. My jawline had sharpened, becoming almost angular and inhuman. My eyes were now sunken and dark, the whites tinged with a sickly yellow. I ran a hand over my arm. The scales were undeniable now, small, hard plates pushing through my skin. A growing weight in my stomach felt alien. A voice, not my own, but a part of me, echoed in my mind, perfectly clear. You have paid your price. The transformation is complete. You are no longer human. Chi. The words resonated with an inescapable finality. I stared at the grotesque reflection, my new reality solidifying into a horrifying truth. My damnation had begun. My money meant nothing now. The morning sun streamed through our kitchen window, warming the tiled floor where Alice sat coloring. Her crayon scratched a rhythm across the paper. I watched her from the counter, stirring my coffee, a smile on my face. This little house in Florida offered a new beginning. My teaching job at the elementary school was going well. The children were engaged. Every evening we would walk to the small park down the street. Alice skipped ahead, her laughter echoed. We built a steady routine here, and a sense of belonging settled over us. Finally, everything felt secure. "Mommy," Alice said one afternoon, her voice small, her crayon suddenly still. She pointed towards the hallway, her finger trembling slightly. "There's a creepy man watching me." I knelt beside her, checking the empty space, explaining that shadows sometimes played tricks and our house was safe. But Alice kept seeing him, describing a tall figure standing in the doorway of her room at night, always just out of sight when I looked closely. My heart, once settled and steady, began to feel a persistent tremor of anxiety. Dishes would fall from the counter when no one was near them, shattering on the tiled floor, and a cold draft brushed through the living room even with all the windows shut tight. Alice started waking up with nightmares. Her scream sharp in the dark, clutching me tightly and whispering about the man who wanted to play. The sense of peace I had carefully built around us began to crack, and I found myself staring into empty corners, feeling watched, questioning what was truly real inside our new home. I bought a small camera and set it up in Alice's room, hoping to capture proof or dismiss my fears. Later that night, I watched the footage, seeing Alice sleep at first. Then a dark shape moved across the wall near the closet door, and a toy car on her dresser slowly rolled off the edge to hit the floor. Alice stirred but did not wake, and a coldness seeped into the room on the recording before the closet door slowly creaked open without a breeze. My terror sharpened after watching the recording, and the entity became bolder. Doors slammed without human touch, and whispers drifted from empty rooms, just out of my hearing. The air inside our home turned thick and heavy, pressing down on my chest, and objects did not just move now, they were thrown with force. Alice's porcelain doll shattered against the kitchen wall as I watched one evening. The presence was no longer vague dread, becoming a clear threat, and it felt truly oppressive. I knew this thing was real. Its anger filled every corner of the house, a tangible weight, and only fear remained. We were trapped inside our home with this thing, our escape blocked by an unseen terror that wanted us for something terrible. It pushed us back, a solid weight pressing against my chest and driving Alice and me into the small bathroom. The door slammed shut, echoing a finality that made my stomach clench. The air inside the small space turned icy, and a crushing pressure bore down on us, stealing my breath. Dark shadows flowed from the corners of the room, swirling together into a shape that had no form but held immense power. It struck my arm, a brutal impact that sent a sharp pain through me, and I cried out. Alice screamed, her small body trembling against mine. The light bulb above us exploded in a shower of glass, plunging the room into near darkness. I saw the small, high window above the toilet, the only way out. I shoved Alice towards it with all my strength, pointing upwards. "Go, Alice, run," I urged, my voice raw and hoarse. She scrambled onto the toilet, her small hands fumbling with the latch, and then she pushed the window open. The cold air from outside rushed in, a brief moment of hope. The entity surged forward, its dark mass lunging towards Alice. I threw myself in front of her, feeling its icy grip close around my body, pulling me away from the window. I felt hands on my throat, squeezing, dragging me back into the consuming darkness of the house. Alice cried my name one last time, a desperate fading sound, as she dropped to the ground outside and ran away, her small shape disappearing into the blackness of the night, searching for help I knew might never come for me. Our days in Richmond stretched out, long and hot beneath the Queensland sun. The dirt road leading to our house would bake solid, then turn to dust with every passing ute. We rode our bikes through the low scrub, pushing past the scratchy leaves, our legs scarred from small falls and close calls. The river was a muddy, slow-moving ribbon where we spent entire afternoons skipping stones and watching dragonflies dart over the water. School was a small brick building in town, a place we endured before escaping back into the open spaces. My best friend Eric lived 2 farms over, and his dad's old ute often rattled up our driveway, bringing him for another afternoon of exploration. Emily lived closer to town. Her parents owned the general store, and she often met us after school, her voice bright against the quiet drone of the country. Eric, with his wild mop of sun-bleached hair and a grin that always promised mischief, was the kind of friend who pulled you into trouble with a shout and a laugh. He possessed an endless supply of energy, and his ideas for adventure, usually involving climbing something or sneaking somewhere, always felt exciting. Emily, with her bright eyes and a quick wit, was the anchor of our trio, bringing a careful planning to Eric's impulsiveness and a calming presence to my own often anxious nature. We had known each other since primary school, growing up together in a world where the nearest city felt like a distant dream, and the bushland behind our homes was our entire universe. The idea for the camping trip surfaced during one particularly sweltering afternoon in January, the kind of heat that made the air shimmer over the bitumen roads. We were gathered in the shade of the old Moreton Bay fig tree in our backyard, sipping warm lemonade and tossing pebbles at a rusty tin can. Eric, bored with the game, suddenly declared we should go camping, just us, without any parents around. Emily's eyes widened, a mixture of apprehension and excitement flickering across her face, while I felt a surge of nervous energy. We had never spent a night out in the bush alone, and the thought of such a venture felt like a true step into adulthood, a real test of our independence. Our plan developed over weeks of whispered conversations and secret meetings. We chose a spot deep within the state forest, a clearing by a creek that Eric claimed to have found during one of his solo explorations. It was far enough from any main road or farm that we knew our parents would never discover our absence for at least a day. We meticulously packed our supplies, a small tent, sleeping bags, a rusty billy can for boiling water, packets of instant noodles, and a stash of lollies bought with our pooled pocket money. We planned to tell our parents we were sleeping over at each other's houses, a plausible enough lie given how often we did exactly that. The thrill of deception added another layer of excitement to our secret adventure. We felt invincible, masters of our own destiny, charting a course that was entirely our own. One afternoon, while collecting firewood from a stack near the river, we ran into Eddie. Eddie was an old man who lived in a ramshackle hut further down the riverbank, a solitary figure known for his long, tangled beard and his profound connection to the land. He spoke with a quiet intensity, his words often laced with stories of the old days and the spirits of the bush. He had watched us grow up and sometimes offered us advice, though usually in the form of cryptic warnings that we, in our youthful exuberance, rarely took seriously. He saw the axe Eric carried and the ropes I had bundled. Eddie squinted at us, his eyes like dark stones beneath bushy brows. "Going deep into the bush, are you?" he asked, his voice a low rumble. Eric, always quick to boast, nodded proudly. "Just us, Eddie. Gonna camp out near the old creek." Eddie's face grew serious. He looked from Eric to Emily, then to me, a peculiar sadness entering his gaze. "You kids need to be careful out there," he cautioned, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "The bush ain't always empty, not when the sun goes down. There are things that walk the high branches, things that listen to young voices and follow the scent of fresh blood." Emily shivered, clutching her arms, and I felt a prickle of unease run down my spine. Eric, however, just laughed, a boisterous sound that echoed through the quiet afternoon. "Ah, come on, Eddie, you and your bush spirits," he scoffed. "We're just going camping, nothing's out there but kangaroos and possums." Eddie shook his head slowly, a solemn expression on his face. "You city folk, you always think you know everything," he muttered, more to himself than to us. "The old ones, they knew better. They respected the spirits, kept their distance. You children, you play with fire you don't understand." He paused, his gaze fixed on a distant point in the trees. "The trees have eyes, and the hollows have mouths. Some things, they watch from above. They wait for the careless ones." His words, delivered with such conviction, cast a momentary shadow over our spirits. Emily looked genuinely disturbed, her usual bright demeanor subdued. I felt a fleeting sense of apprehension, a cold knot in my stomach. Eric, however, clapped Eddie on the shoulder with a playful grin, dismissing his warnings with a wave of his hand. "Don't worry, Eddie. We'll be fine. We know what we're doing." Eddie just sighed, turning back to his task of sharpening a hunting knife. We stood there for a moment longer, the weight of his words lingering in the air. Then Eric nudged us forward, eager to continue our preparations. "He's just an old, superstitious man," Eric declared, forcing a laugh as we walked away. "He loves to scare people with those old stories. There's nothing to worry about." Emily still looked hesitant, but Eric's confident tone and my own desire to push away the unsettling feeling helped us both to brush aside Eddie's strange pronouncements. We were young and full of confidence, convinced that the bush was simply a playground for our adventures, a place where rules and fears from the adult world did not apply. Eddie's warnings faded into the background. Just another eccentric tale from an old man, easily overshadowed by the exhilarating prospect of our secret trip. We imagined a night of freedom beneath a sky full of stars, sharing secrets and laughter, proving to ourselves and the world that we were old enough for anything. The forest ahead promised adventure, not danger, and we stepped eagerly into its deceptive embrace. The sun was already dipping towards the horizon when we finally loaded Eric's old, battered ute. It smelled of hay and dust, a familiar scent from countless trips to his farm, but today it carried a different significance. This was our escape vehicle, our transport to true freedom. Eric revved the engine, the sound loud in the quiet afternoon. And then we were off, kicking up a plume of red dust as we sped down the dirt track. We turned onto the main road, heading west, away from town and towards the deeper parts of the state forest. The landscape changed quickly. The scattered farmhouses gave way to denser bushland. The trees grew taller and closer. Their branches met overhead, creating a dark passage. The light through the leaves became a deeper green shade. Eric cranked up the radio, a crackling pop song filling the small cab, and we sang along, our voices full of youthful confidence. Emily laughed, leaning her head back against the worn seat, her bright eyes reflecting the changing light. After a long stretch of bitumen, Eric turned the ute onto a narrow, unpaved track, barely more than 2 ruts carved into the earth. The branches of the eucalypts scraped against the sides of the vehicle, showering us with dry leaves and small twigs. The track was rough, forcing us to slow down, and the playful atmosphere in the ute began to shift. The music became muffled by the bumps and rattles, and our laughter subsided into quiet conversation. "This is it," Eric announced, his voice carrying a note of excitement. "Past that old gum tree, and we're almost there." He pointed ahead to a massive tree standing sentinel by the track, its bark peeling in long strips. Emily leaned forward, looking out the window, her brow furrowed. "It's getting dark back here, Eric," she said, her voice soft. "Are you sure this is the right way?" "Of course it is," Eric scoffed, glancing at her with a grin. "Don't tell me you're getting scared already. You just wait until the drop bears get you." Emily's eyes widened. "Drop bears? What are drop bears?" "Only the most terrifying creatures in the Australian bush," he declared, his voice dramatic. "They look like koalas, but they're massive, 5 times bigger. And they have sharp claws, fangs. They hide in the highest branches and wait for unsuspecting campers to walk underneath. Then, wham! They drop right on your head and scoop out your brains with their claws." I saw Emily shiver, pulling her arms around herself. Even though Eric's story was meant as a joke, a shiver went through me too. The trees outside looked tall and dense. The shadows grew long and distorted as the sun sank lower. "Don't listen to him, Emily," I said, trying to sound reassuring. "He's just trying to scare you. Drop bears aren't real. It's just an old bushy story. That's what they want you to think," Eric countered, his eyes gleaming in the rearview mirror. "They're silent, too. You'd never hear them coming until it's too late. They blend in with the bark. You're just walking along, happy as anything, and then suddenly you're flat on your back with a furry, fanged monster tearing into your face." He made a ripping sound with his mouth. Emily pressed herself closer to me, her apprehension evident. Her previous bright demeanor had vanished, replaced by a quiet nervousness. The bush outside seemed to press in on us with every meter we traveled, the towering eucalypts casting deep, solid shadows across the track. The air grew cooler, carrying the damp scent of eucalyptus and decaying leaves. The sounds of the day, the distant chirping of birds and the buzz of insects began to fade, replaced by a growing quiet. "It's fine, Emily," I repeated, reaching out to pat her arm. My voice felt less certain. I tried to dismiss the image Eric had painted, but the sheer size of the trees outside made it plausible. The way the branches intertwined high above created a dense canopy, a good hiding place for anything, real or imagined. We had grown up around bushland, but this felt wilder, untouched. The tracks were overgrown, and the air carried an old scent of earth and something ancient. This was not the familiar scrub behind our homes. After another bumpy 15 minutes, the track finally opened into a small clearing. A narrow creek snaked along one side, its water dark, still. The clearing was surrounded by enormous gum trees, their smooth, pale trunks rising straight into the darkening sky. It was exactly as Eric had described, secluded and private. Eric killed the engine, and the sudden silence was absolute, a heavy weight after the rattling journey. The air felt colder outside the vehicle, and the sounds of the bush, previously absent, began to fill the air. The rustle of leaves in a light breeze, the distant croak of a frog by the creek, the high chirp of insects. We quickly set about establishing our camp. Eric, with his usual energy, began gathering firewood while Emily and I wrestled with the small tent. The fabric was stiff and the poles unwieldy, but eventually we managed to get it upright, a small dome of orange nylon against the vast backdrop of the darkening forest. The task of setting up camp provided a temporary distraction from the growing unease. Our movements were brisk and purposeful, a shared effort that brought back a sense of camaraderie. As the last light bled from the sky, we had our campfire roaring, its cheerful flames pushing back the encroaching darkness. The heat felt good on our faces, and the smell of burning wood was comforting. We huddled around it, toasting marshmallows Emily had packed, their sugary sweetness a welcome treat. For a while, the simple act of camping felt real, a successful adventure, just as we had imagined. The flickering firelight cast shadows on the surrounding trees, making them seem to move and watch, but for a moment, we ignored that. "You know," Eric said, picking a burnt marshmallow off his stick, "my dad told me about some other things out here, not drop bears, but other stuff." He paused, looking around at the darkened edges of the clearing. Emily tensed, her gaze darting into the shadows. "What other stuff?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "Old stories," Eric continued, his voice now lower, losing some of its earlier playfulness. "About the spirit of the bush. Things that mimic sounds, things that climb. Sometimes," he said, "if you're out deep enough, you'll hear strange calls. A baby's cry, or someone calling your name. It sounds like a human voice." I felt a fresh wave of apprehension wash over me. Eddie's warnings from earlier in the week resurfaced in my mind, the strange sadness in his eyes. Eric was usually full of bluster, but there was a seriousness in his tone now that made the stories feel less like jokes. "He said," Eric went on, tossing his stick into the fire, "that the old ones, the ones from the Dreamtime stories, they didn't just live on the ground. They lived in the trees, high up, and they watched." He gestured upwards towards the thick canopy overhead, a place where the firelight did not reach. Emily wrapped her arms around her knees, her face pale in the firelight. "Stop it, Eric," she pleaded, her voice trembling slightly. "You're scaring me." "I'm just telling stories," Eric replied, though his own gaze lingered on the upper branches. "It's part of camping. Bush legends." He picked up another stick and poked at the fire, sending sparks flying into the night. The sounds of the bush became more distinct as the night deepened. The rustling of leaves no longer sounded like a gentle breeze, but something else, something moving deliberately. A twig snapped somewhere out in the darkness, a sharp, sudden sound that made us all jump. Emily gasped, her eyes wide with fear. "It's just an animal," I said, trying to be brave, though my heart beat faster in my chest. "Probably a possum or a wallaby." Eric, however, did not agree. He cocked his head, listened. "That was a bit heavy for a possum," he muttered, his voice quiet. He picked up a heavier piece of wood, holding it ready. The air around us felt different now. The earlier sense of freedom and adventure had dissolved into a tangible anxiety. The fire, which had felt comforting, now seemed to draw attention, a bright point in the vast, consuming darkness. Beyond the bright circle of our firelight, the trees stood silent and towering. Their dark forms blended into a solid wall. The sounds that came from them differed from the chirps and squawks of our backyard bush. These sounds were deeper, resonant, hard to identify. We tried to resume our cheerful conversation, but the attempts felt forced, brittle. Each crackle of the fire, each distant rustle in the leaves made us tense up, our eyes darting into the surrounding shadows. The joy of our secret trip had been replaced by a gnawing apprehension. We were alone in a place that felt too big and too ancient for us. The carefree setting of our evening had become a stage for something else, something that pressed in on us from all sides. The tales, Eric told, even in jest, had found purchase in the dark, silent bush. We sat there, 3 small figures bathed in the orange glow. The blackness around us grew closer, quiet, waiting. I awoke to a sound that was not a part of the familiar night. It was a heavy thud, then a scraping movement above our heads, a vast weight dragging across the branches of the towering gum trees. Emily stirred beside me in the sleeping bag, her breath catching in her throat. The small tent felt suddenly suffocating. I held her close, our bodies pressed together, listening with desperate intensity. Another movement, closer this time, sounded like an enormous body shifting through the dense leaves. It was coming from the highest branches, directly over our small clearing. The sound was deliberate, slow, and powerful. A low growl vibrated through the air, a sound that came from deep within something ancient and vast. It was not an animal I recognized from any bushwalks. My heart hammered a frantic rhythm against my ribs in the absolute quiet of the tent. Emily's grip on my arm tightened, her nails digging into my skin. Her breathing became shallow and ragged. We lay there, frozen, listening to the heavy presence moving above us. A thick twig snapped loudly, then another, then the distinct rustle of large leaves being pushed aside with immense force. It circled the clearing, a predator moving with disturbing purpose. I strained my ears trying to locate Eric. He had insisted on sleeping by the dying fire just outside the tent, a show of youthful bravado we had reluctantly humored. The fire had died down to glowing embers, providing little comfort now. The darkness beyond the thin tent fabric pressed in, a solid, tangible mass. Then, a branch directly over us groaned, protesting loudly under immense weight. The tent fabric vibrated, a faint tremor through the nylon. A shadow fell across the tent opening, impossibly large, blocking the dim starlight that filtered through the canopy. We pressed ourselves further into the very corner of the tent, our faces buried deep in the sleeping bags, not daring to make even a single sound. A guttural snarl ripped through the air, a sound of pure predatory hunger that scraped against my eardrums. It was followed by a sudden, sickening thud just outside the tent, a heavy impact that shook the very ground beneath us. Then came Eric's scream, a raw, piercing sound of pure terror that was abruptly cut short, replaced by a desperate gurgling sound. I heard tearing, ripping sounds, wet and violent, horribly close. Emily whimpered, a small, choked sound of complete despair. I clamped my hand over her mouth, pulling her closer to my trembling body, my own silent scream trapped in my throat. The horrifying sounds continued, a brutal sequence of struggle and consumption. Eric's desperate pleas were stifled, turning into faint, agonized gasps, then silence. The creature made a strange, chittering noise, a sound of deep satisfaction, a sound of triumph. Then came the tearing again, the sickening wet sounds of flesh being violently ripped apart. The sounds moved, slowly, deliberately, dragging something heavy. It was being pulled away, uphill into the impenetrable density of the trees surrounding the clearing. Every rustle of leaves, every crack of a branch underfoot echoed with Eric's final horrifying moments. The sounds receded deeper into the bush, gradually fading into the vast, consuming night. We heard a final, sickening crunch, then a wet gulp, a sound of finality. After that, only the natural sounds of the night remained. The chirping insects, the distant croak of a frog, sounded normal again, but their normalcy was a new, profound horror. Emily was sobbing silently against my chest, her tears hot on my skin, her body shaking uncontrollably. I could not move. I could not speak. The world outside our tent was no longer safe. The horror we had dismissed as children's tales had revealed itself with brutal clarity. It was real. It was monstrous. It had taken Eric. We lay there, huddled, waiting for the impossible dawn, but knowing the world had changed forever, irrevocably broken. The next morning, it was Emily who found the strength to move. She crawled out of the tent, her body shaking, and stumbled towards the still smoking campfire. I watched her from the tent opening, numb and disbelieving. She picked up a charred stick and threw it into the nearby creek. Then she screamed, a raw, broken sound that ripped through the quiet bush. That scream, carried on the morning air, was what eventually brought help. A distant farmer, out checking fences, heard her and investigated. The police arrived, then paramedics. They found us, two terrified, shell-shocked teenagers, huddled in a clearing with a story they did not understand. Emily kept pointing towards the trees, whispering Eric's name. I could not speak, frozen in a world that felt utterly alien. The official explanation was swift and simple. A wild dog attack, perhaps a dingo, though no body was found, only traces of blood and torn fabric. They said we had imagined the rest, traumatized by the event. Our parents, relieved to find us alive, cooperated, eager to bury the horror. The truth, whatever it was deemed too unbelievable, too disturbing for anyone to accept. Emily and I were separated. Her parents moved to Brisbane a few months later. My own family eventually sold our farm, moving closer to town, away from the bush that now held such a terrible memory. We never spoke of that night, not to each other, not to anyone. The unspoken horror festered beneath the surface of our manufactured normal lives. I saw Emily once, years later, in a supermarket. Her eyes, when they met mine, held the same haunted look. We nodded, a silent acknowledgement of the unbreakable chain that bound us to Eric's fate, then turned away. The guilt of survival was a constant, dull ache, a phantom limb that throbbed with every memory I pushed down. Decades passed. I married, had children. I built a life that seemed ordinary, safe, far removed from the dirt roads and towering gum trees of my youth. I worked a steady job, paid my bills, watched my kids grow. But the bush never truly left me. I found myself drawn to documentaries about Australian wildlife, always searching for an explanation, something to make sense of what we had witnessed. Nothing fit. The creature had no name, no scientific classification. It remained a phantom, a ghost of an impossible memory. Then the dreams started again, clearer now, more vivid than they had been in years. I heard Eric scream, the tearing sounds. I saw shadows moving in the high branches. I woke up sweating, my heart pounding against my ribs. A new unease settled over me, a prickling sensation on the back of my neck when I walked alone, even in a crowded street. I dismissed it as old age, a resurfacing of childhood trauma. But then things began to happen, small at first. Our neighbor's dog, a boisterous Labrador, vanished from their backyard. Then another, a stray cat that often visited our patio for scraps, disappeared. There were reports of strange calls at night, echoing from the dense tree line beyond our suburban estate, sounds like a baby crying or a child calling out for help. I heard them myself. Late one night, a chilling, insistent wail that raised goosebumps on my arms. They were almost human, yet wrong. My memory, long suppressed, stirred. Eddie's words came back to me, unbidden, things that mimic sounds, things that climb. I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that the past had not remained buried. It had simply waited. The old, rusted ute still sat in Eddie's yard, overgrown with vines, a monument to a simpler time. His ramshackle hut had aged, leaning further into the surrounding scrub, but a wisp of smoke still curled from its chimney. He was older, his beard whiter, his frame thinner, but his eyes still held that same intensity, those dark, knowing stones beneath bushy brows. I found him sitting on his porch, whittling a piece of wood. He looked up as I approached, his gaze unwavering, as if he had been expecting me. "It's been a long time, boy," he rumbled, his voice gravelly with age. "Thought you'd forgotten the bush altogether." I explained the unsettling events, the dreams, the strange calls, the disappearing animals. I spoke of the night Eric died, of the creature no longer using the vague terms of a wild animal, but as something real, something specific. He listened, silent, his whittling knife still. When I finished, the quiet stretched between us, filled only by the sounds of the bush. Eddie finally spoke, his voice low, a storyteller's cadence. "You remember what I told you about the old ones, the ones in the trees?" I nodded. "The legend, it has a name. We called it the Yarama, Yahahu. It's not a spirit, not truly. It's a creature of the deep bush. It looks like a small, red frog, but it has large head, a large mouth, and long, sucking fingers and toes. It climbs, swift as a shadow, always high in the tallest trees. It waits." He paused, his eyes fixed on some distant point in the bush, a dark memory playing across his face. "When it finds a traveler, especially one lost or alone, it drops from the branches. It wraps its long fingers around them, uses its suckers to drain their blood. Then, it sits there, digesting, until it gets sick and vomits them back up. But the person who comes out, they are smaller. They are a Yarama Ahahu themselves. They have red skin, a large mouth, and long fingers and toes." He looked at me, his gaze piercing. "That's what happened to your friend, Eric. It swallowed him. It turned him. My blood ran cold. The image of the creature, Eric's screams, the tearing sounds, they coalesced into a grotesque new understanding. The horrifying process, the transformation. It was a cycle, a grotesque propagation. The creature had not just consumed Eric, it had made him, and it could make others. I left Eddie's hut in a daze, the setting sun painting the bush in hues of orange and purple, a beautiful veneer over unspeakable horror. The drive home was a blur of gravel and trees, each shadow suddenly holding a new menace. The truth, finally revealed, was far more terrifying than any mystery. It explained the lack of a body, the impossible speed of the attack, the strange sounds. It explained the chilling familiarity of the noises I heard in the night. Eddie's words echoed in my mind, a relentless, terrifying cadence. It swallows them whole. It vomits them back up. The person who comes out, they are a Yarama, Yahahu themselves. Gah. I pulled into my driveway, the house dark and quiet. I entered, flicked on the lights, and poured myself a glass of water, my hands trembling. The revelations had shattered the fragile peace I had built over decades. I walked to the window, needing to see the reassuring normalcy of my suburban street. But there was no normalcy. Outside, perched high in the branches of the ancient gum tree that shaded my front yard, a tree I had never paid much attention to before, something sat. It was small, vaguely humanoid, with reddish skin that almost blended with the rough bark. Its head looked too large for its body, and its long, slender fingers tipped with suckers gripped the branch with disturbing strength. Its mouth was wide, unnaturally so, a dark slit across its face. It sat perfectly still, watching my window. Its eyes, impossibly black, met mine across the dark expanse of my yard. They held a spark of knowing, an ancient, patient intelligence. It had been there, waiting, watching my house, perhaps for days, perhaps for weeks. And in those dark, vacant eyes, I saw not just a monster, but a faint, horrifying familiarity. The horror had never left. It had simply grown. I walked home from school, the afternoon sun warm on my face. Near the traffic junction where cars rushed past, I saw something in the dirt. It was a doll, covered in mud, tossed beside a storm drain. Its clothes were torn and grime streaked its plastic face, but I could still see its large glass eyes looking up at me. I picked it up, my fingers brushing against the cold plastic. It felt heavy in my hands, almost like a real baby. I looked around, making sure no one was watching. Then I tucked it inside my backpack. At home, I snuck into the bathroom and washed the mud away. The doll had dark hair and pale skin. I decided to keep her safe, a secret just for me, and I felt a strange connection, a warmth spreading through my chest as I looked at her. I put her inside my backpack for safekeeping, but when I woke up the next morning, she was sitting on my bedside table, her dark eyes open. I remember putting her in my school bag. Then I placed her in my drawer, pulling it shut tightly. Hours later, when I opened my cupboard to get my uniform, she was there, propped against my shoes. I started wanting to spend all my time with her. I stopped playing during recess and stayed in my seat, drawing pictures of the doll. My teacher, Ms. Lee, began looking at me with a worried expression, sometimes asking if I felt unwell. At home, I did not talk much at dinner. I did not want to watch television with my parents. I just wanted to be in my room with her. My mother noticed my quietness. She asked me why I did not play outside anymore. One afternoon, my parents found the doll hidden under my bed when they cleaned my room. My mother picked her up, her face serious. My father saw the doll and then looked at me. He said the doll was causing my change. He carried the doll outside to the large rubbish bin near the roadside. I watched from my window as he threw her in. I felt a sharp pang inside my chest. The next day, I opened my cupboard to get a book. The doll sat on the top shelf, her hands resting on her knees, watching me. I woke with a start. My room was dark, and a light from the window showed it was still night, past any hour I knew. A voice spoke inside my head, clear and commanding. "Take me to the junction." I sat up in bed. Every part of me resisted, yet an urge I could not fight pulled me from my bed. My legs moved on their own towards my shelf. I found the doll there, her dark eyes open, watching me. I picked her up, feeling her warmth in my arms. I walked to my door and opened it. The hallway was dark. My bare feet made no sound on the floor as I moved through the house. I opened the front door and stepped out into the cool night. The streetlights cast long shadows down the empty road. I walked towards the busy traffic junction. When I reached the junction, the road was empty. I stood on the pavement. The doll slid from my hands. She landed on the asphalt road, a dark shape against the gray. I looked at her lying there. Then I stepped into the street to pick her up. A flash of bright light came from my left. A loud screech filled the air, then an impact threw me backwards. The world went dark. I opened my eyes. The ceiling above was white. A hospital smell filled the air around me. My head hurt. I felt a touch on my hand. My mother sat beside me. Her face looked tired. My father stood near my bed. "Where is she?" I asked, my voice weak. "Where is my doll?" My mother stroked my arm. "There was no doll, darling," she said. "The police did not find any doll at the accident." My father nodded his head. A man in a blue uniform walked past my room door. He stopped. He looked in. "Did you say doll?" he asked. My parents turned to him. "Yes, officer," my mother said. "Anastasia keeps asking for her doll." The officer stepped into the room. His face was serious. "This is strange," he said. "There was another accident last year at that same junction." He looked at me. Another child was involved, and she also had a doll with her. My mother gasped. My father stared at the officer. "That doll was never found," the officer continued. "The little girl did not make it." I looked at my parents, then they looked at the officer. My doll had made me go to that place. The junction had been waiting for a child. It had been waiting for me, too. I found a photograph of a child in the old album, a girl with clear eyes. Abby, I thought, a name that felt both familiar and distant. Who was this girl, Abby? I asked my father, holding the picture toward him. He looked at the photograph briefly, then returned his attention to his newspaper. His words came without inflection. Her parents died in a car crash when she was very young, quite tragic. He turned a page, the paper crinkling. She was placed into foster care outside of the state. We lost contact with her after that time. The way he spoke, so blandly, erased any sorrow from the event, making it only a cold fact. I could not understand his lack of emotion. An uncomfortable feeling began to spread through my chest, a vague memory trying to surface but staying out of reach. His casual dismissal of Abby's life deeply unsettled me, leaving an unsettling void. A memory clicked into place. I remembered visiting Abby. My father drove us to a small house with a white porch. A woman with a wide smile met us at the door, her hair pulled back tight from her face. She led us into a room where Abby sat at a small wooden table, coloring with stubby crayons. Abby looked up at me with large eyes but did not speak. The woman placed a hand on Abby's small shoulder. She said Abby had taken a vow of silence. She said Abby chose not to speak to anyone. I asked Abby if I could see her drawings, but she only looked at her paper. I tried to ask her about her crayons, about what colors she liked, but she never made a sound. She watched my face with her wide, still eyes. I did not understand a vow. I did not know why a child would choose to be so quiet. My parents talked to the woman for a long time. Then we went outside and got into the car. I remember turning my head to look through the back window as we drove away. Abby still sat at the table inside the house, her small hand holding a crayon. She watched us leave, her face not moving. I raised my hand in a small wave, but Abby did not wave back. She stayed still in the chair. The memory of Abby at the small wooden table no longer held its childish innocence. Her wide, still eyes, once simply quiet, now spoke of a desperate plea I had utterly failed to hear. It was not a vow of silence she had taken. It was a cage in which she sat, watching us leave, unable to speak, unable to move, unable to signal the suffering she surely endured. My small hand waving goodbye, her unmoving face in the window, all solidified into a single horrifying truth. I had abandoned her, just as my parents had, blinded by my youth and their calculated detachment. The family's casual indifference, once merely unsettling, now felt like a cold, deliberate act of forgetting, and I had been part of it. I lifted my phone, its screen glowing in my hand, and typed Abby's name into the search engine. There were no results, no images, no records of her life after that day. The vast expanse of the internet held no trace of the child we had left behind, swallowed by a system that rarely looked back. She was gone, a life lost to memory, and her current whereabouts were unknown, cementing an irretrievable loss that tightened around my chest. I walked to the kitchen and filled a glass with water. The ice cubes tumbled into the cold water with a soft clink. I drank the water slowly, sip after sip, letting the chills spread through me. I woke up on the couch. 3 months had passed since the accident. My eyes opened to the familiar ceiling, then tracked to the kitchen where Sarah moved. She was there, standing by the coffee maker, her back to me. The smell of fresh brew filled the small living room. I sat up, pushing myself with my forearms. A dull ache settled behind my eyes. She had not turned around. I watched as she pulled a mug from the cupboard, then poured the hot coffee into it. The stream was steady, dark. My throat felt dry. I wanted to ask for a cup, to feel the warmth of the ceramic in my hands, but the words did not come out. Instead, I watched her. Sarah walked toward the sink, the full mug held loosely in her hand. She tipped it, and the coffee cascaded into the basin, swirling brown foam before disappearing down the drain. She set the empty mug back on the counter. Her movements were precise, deliberate. "Good morning, Sarah," I said, my voice coming out thin. She did not respond. She did not even flinch. She simply turned and began wiping down the counter, her gaze fixed on the gleaming surface. I tried again. "Are you all right?" She moved to the pantry, pulling out a box of cereal. My chest tightened. It was like I was not even there. I stood up, the rug soft beneath my bare feet. My heart beat a strange rhythm, a mix of confusion and something colder. I felt a growing uneasiness. The front door chimed, a familiar melody that usually heralded a friend or family member. Sarah, still by the kitchen counter, did not react. I watched her as she moved to the door and opened it. Mark stood there, my younger brother, his face drawn and weary. His eyes met Sarah's, a shared sorrow already passing between them. Sarah stepped forward, her body shaking as she collapsed into his arms. Her sobs began, soft at first, then growing into a raw, guttural sound that tore at my chest. "I just miss him so much, Mark," she wept, her voice muffled against his shoulder. "Every day it gets harder." My heart seized. Him. I was standing right there, only feet away. "Sarah, I'm here," I pleaded, my voice cracking with desperation. "What are you talking about? Look at me." Mark simply held her, stroking her hair. He offered soothing words, his own voice thick with a grief I could not comprehend, a grief that seemed to be for me. "I know, Sarah," he said gently. "I miss him too. We all do." Panic coiled in my gut. They couldn't hear me. They couldn't see me. I took a step closer, my hand reaching out for Sarah, wanting to pull her away from this bizarre charade, to make her look at me, to acknowledge my presence. My fingers brushed against her shoulder, but there was no contact. My hand passed through the fabric of her blouse, through her skin, through her very being, encountering no resistance at all. I recoiled, staring at my hand, then at her. My arm felt cold, a strange, hollow sensation where I expected warmth and solidity. Mark was still holding her, comforting her, his arms wrapped around a person I had just failed to touch. My own skin prickled with a horrifying realization. My existence had become nothing more than a ghost, a presence that could observe but never interact. I was not real to them, not anymore. The terrifying truth settled in my bones, chilling me to the core. Weeks stretched into a succession of silent days and nights. I watched them. Sarah maintained her performance of grief. Her movements remained slow, her eyes often red-rimmed when Mark was around. He came by almost daily now. His visits grew longer. He would sit with her on the couch, not where I had woken, but in the armchair across the room. She would rest her head on his shoulder, and he would hold her, his hand rubbing slow circles on her back. I noticed the way their eyes met sometimes, a quick, almost imperceptible look that went beyond shared sorrow. There was a closeness that felt too intimate for a grieving sister-in-law and brother-in-law. My chest tightened when Mark would tuck a strand of hair behind her ear, his fingers lingering on her skin. She never pulled away. Instead, she leaned into his touch, her face softened. The grief seemed to vanish in moments when they thought they were truly alone. I heard her laugh, a soft, genuine sound when Mark told a story about work. She would quickly compose herself if a neighbor called, her voice dropping back to the mournful tone. This careful shifting, this instant change, ignited a new suspicion inside me. Their charade was too perfect, too easily turned on and off. I began to watch their faces for signs of strain, for cracks in their performance. I started to see them. The subtle smiles they exchanged when they believed I was not there. The way Mark's gaze would track her movements around the house. Possessive. My suspicion deepened with each passing day. Evening light filled the living room. Sarah sat on the couch with Mark, his arm around her, her head on his shoulder. I had heard her laugh earlier. An advertisement glowed on the television screen, ignored. Mark leaned in, his voice low. "Do you think anyone suspects?" Sarah raised her head. Her expression changed to a calculating look, the sadness gone. "Neighbors still bring casseroles," she said, a faint smile. "They all bought it. Every tear." My stomach clenched. This was not grief, but performance. My suspicion became a horrifying certainty. "Good," Mark said. His hand found her cheek. His thumb traced her jaw. "I knew you could pull it off. You are a good actress." Sarah leaned into his touch. "And you, playing the heartbroken brother. We make a convincing pair." Her voice held dark amusement. I stood there, frozen. The air felt heavy, thick with their lies. Intimate gestures, shared looks, the comfort I had mistaken for solace, it all made sickening sense. My brother, my wife. This was why I was a ghost. This was their secret. Mark's gaze dropped to her lips. He lowered his head. Sarah met him halfway. Their mouths met in a long, soft kiss. It was a kiss of triumph, complicity, a dark shared secret. Heat consumed me. It started in my chest, spread, burning through my incorporeal form. Blinding rage erupted inside me. Her fake tears, Mark's sympathetic touch, his whispered words of comfort surged back, mocking love and loss. The pain crushed me. This was a celebration of my absence. They had stolen my life and celebrated it. The betrayal was absolute. The rage burned through me. Then abruptly the room emptied. Mark and Sarah were gone. I stood alone in the quiet space. My gaze drifted to the coffee table. A printed document lay there, a police report. I moved closer, reading the black letters on the white page. It detailed an incident, suspicious single-vehicle collision. 3 occupants, 2 fatalities, 1 survivor. The facts presented themselves with terrible finality. 3 occupants, 2 fatalities, 1 survivor. The accident 3 months ago. I was one of those fatalities. I had died in that car. My wife and my brother had killed me. They had created this elaborate lie, playing out their cruel performance of grief while I haunted the very home where they celebrated my death. I was a ghost because I was dead, murdered by the 2 people I thought I loved. The year 2026 stood poised on the horizon, another opportunity for me to finally shed these unwelcome pounds. My waistline currently sported considerable love handles, a stark reminder of every past failed resolution. This time, however, things would be entirely different. I had committed to a strict diet, a regimen of lean proteins and crisp vegetables, an ascetic journey I truly dreaded. Before embarking on that joyless path, I needed one last magnificent culinary celebration. I had been meticulously planning this grand final indulgence for weeks. My old recipe books lay open, marked with notes and circled ingredients, as I refined my masterpiece. Every cut of meat, every rich sauce, every side dish was chosen with precise care. This was not merely a meal. It was my opulent hora, a lavish send-off to the unbridled eating I cherished. The preparation required absolute dedication. I confirmed the perfect cooking times and the exact amounts of butter and oil needed for ultimate richness. This feast represented a bittersweet farewell to my culinary muse, the rich flavors and excessive preparations I truly loved. It was a powerful testament to all the deliciousness I would soon forsake. I already imagined the textures, the aromas, the overwhelming satisfaction of each forbidden bite. This meticulously crafted meal would be the perfect conclusion before I faced a long year of healthy living and strict discipline. The kitchen served as my laboratory for this final feast. I pulled out my heaviest cast-iron skillet, its surface scarred by years of glorious meals. I poured a full bottle of olive oil into the skillet, creating a shimmering pool. The flame licked the pan's underside, heating the oil to its exact readiness. Thick cuts of ribeye, seasoned with coarse salt and cracked pepper, met the hot fat with a loud sizzle. That sound filled the small kitchen, signaling impending indulgence. Sliced potatoes, tossed with butter and fresh garlic, joined the pan, eager to absorb the richness. The air grew thick with the sense of searing meat and caramelized potato, a rich perfume that quickened my pulse. Each stir of the potatoes, each flip of the steak, was a careful movement. This cooking was an act of devotion, a slow process of building flavor upon flavor. I watched the golden crust develop on the meat and the potatoes soften, anticipating every texture and taste. The final basting with more butter and herbs sealed the decadent promise of the meal. When the feast reached its peak, I carefully plated the food. A generous mountain of steak and potatoes filled the plate. I carried it to my dining table, now lit only by a single candle that cast a warm glow. The room remained dark, undisturbed by outside distractions. I sat down and picked up my fork, savoring the moment before the first bite. There was no rush. Each forkful received my full, undivided attention. The ribeye, rich and tender, dissolved on my tongue, releasing layers of fat and seasoning. The potatoes, crisp on the outside and soft within, offered their buttery satisfaction. I chewed slowly, allowing the flavors to linger on my palate. This was a private celebration, a deep appreciation of every flavor. Every mouthful was a silent promise of future deprivation, a glorious last stand against the healthy future I had planned. I ate until the plate was clean, until only the lingering scent remained. I pushed the empty plate away, feeling deep contentment. This marked the true beginning of the new regimen. My diet for 2026 would center entirely on grilling. No more rich sauces, no more excessive oils or fats, just the clean, direct heat of the grill. I would choose leaner cuts, vegetables charred to perfection, and simple seasonings. It was a healthier way to prepare food, a significant improvement for my body, promising years of sustained energy and better health. I walked towards the kitchen, contemplating the lighter, cleaner tastes of my next meal. Then a distinct whimper sounded from below, followed by a muffled scream that vibrated through the basement floorboards. My final meal was still screaming for help from the basement. I allowed myself a small smile, recalling how excited the last 6 had been when I brought them up for their turn. This new approach, grill only, meant a different kind of preparation entirely, a simpler, more efficient method that would streamline my weekly routine. The flavors would certainly change, becoming more earthy and direct, but the deep fulfillment remained constant, an abiding satisfaction I knew well.